What's up, guys? Thank you so much for joining me for my very first episode of the Attachment Confessions. My name is Chelsea, and guys, I am truly so excited to be doing this. And also that y'all are along for the ride while I take you on this journey of figuring out the incredibly complex world of relationshiping. Is that even a word? I don't know. It is now, I guess. But, anyways, from the moment that I learned about a little thing called attachment science, everything, literally everything about every relationship I had ever been in finally made sense. And now I'm learning what it takes to earn my attachment security and have awesome, meaningful, healthy relationships moving forward. On the Attachment Confessions, we'll dive into the fascinating world of attachment science, my childhood, my relationships, hashtag yikes, and my journey to going from FA to secure AF. And if that last part made absolutely no sense to you, do not worry at all. It will make sense soon. So let's freaking go. All right. So let me just say, I cannot believe I am actually doing this, you guys. Never in my life did I think I would start a podcast, let alone one that's about to get as personal as this subject matter is going to get. But learning about attachment science changed my life. No joke. I know that that sounds so dramatic, but it's 1000% the truth. So, this idea came to me in the middle of the night on July 19th, 2025. And that was just 3 days after breaking up with the man who I thought I was going to marry. So at this point, he and I had been together just shy of 2 years. And had I not gone down the rabbit hole of attachment science just a few months prior to our breakup, I'm telling you, I would be in a totally different headspace and heart space than where I'm at today. So, thanks to the mysterious ways in which my God operates, I stumbled upon a social psychologist on Facebook sometime back in April or May of this year, who specializes in attachment science. And thanks to this random stumble, but I mean, not really random, nothing in life is coincidence, I finally was able to make sense of that man that I thought that I was going to marry, as well as myself. Like, why is he the way that he is? Why am I the way that I am? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if we have any of you guys out there listening, it can all be explained by the science of attachment. So, here I am, almost 2 months out of that relationship, with so much insight as to why he and I never would have actually worked out in the long run. So, along with insight into other previous relationships before him as well, and most importantly, so much more clarity of who I am and what I will be looking for from now on in a partner. And also where I've had blind spots and not knowing like where I need to grow and change. So, really and truly, I can say without any hyperbole here, attachment science changed my life for real. Since my discovery, I have talked to countless friends who've never heard of attachment science, but once I give them the scoop on it, I practically have to lift their jaws off the floor. This stuff just clicks, which is why I have no doubt that it was a power greater than myself that woke me up in the middle of the night in July with the seed planted inside my soul to start a podcast about this. I am obsessed with this subject matter and I cannot wait to blow y'all's minds. But before going any further, I do want to give a quick shout out to my support system. So I've told a couple handfuls of my closest friends about this journey I'm about to take you all on. And they have been the freaking best, y'all. Like, so supportive, so encouraging, so enthusiastic. So, I really want to give my sincerest thank you to you guys. It means literally the world to me. You know who you are. Okay. Also, I need to give a brief disclaimer. So, y'all, I am just a regular girl from Oklahoma, okay? Not a psychologist or an attachment theory professional. Although at this point, I honestly feel as though I should totally have an honorary doctorate in attachment theory. Just kidding. Obviously, I know a lot more goes into it than just a few months of like deep diving into the abyss of this subject matter. But, anyways, needless to say, do not take anything that I share with you guys in the attachment confessions as medical advice. However, I will be providing you with resources from actual experts and social psychologists in this area throughout future episodes to help you on your healing journeys, like what I'm using and referencing throughout mine. All right, time for the science-y part. First, let's go over what even the basics are of attachment science. The dude behind it all, the guy we can give all the credit to, his name is John Bowlby, and he was a British psychologist. And he was the first attachment theorist. So he studied and developed the core attachment theory concepts in the 1950s, 1960s. Obviously, it has evolved since then. The science of attachment refers to the attachment style that you form when you are a child, which is primarily in the 0 to 5 year age range. So, very, very, very young, based on the emotional attunement level or lack thereof of your parents or primary caregivers. This formed attachment style then goes on to shape how you behave moving forward in your relationships for the rest of your life. Now, this is primarily in romantic relationships, but also in friendships and professional working relationships, etc. Now, obviously, having something formed that young in childhood that then goes on to shape how you behave for the rest of your life, like that sounds crazy, but there is good news. And the good news is that we can actually heal our attachment wounds. So, since attachment is learned, it can essentially be unlearned, which I think is just so freaking cool, right? It's like you're not just totally doomed if you didn't have like a secure attachment style formed in childhood, right? That's just such good news. So, self awareness is key, but knowledge is just the beginning, right? So it's like self awareness is a huge aspect to this. People have blinders on to their own behaviors and self sabotaging ways a lot of the time, right? So once you actually have that self awareness aspect, that's huge. But again, that's just the beginning. You have to put in work to truly heal your insecure attachment style, but it can be done. So, what has to happen is you have to actually change your subconscious mind. It's automatic behavior that constantly runs in the background. That's what our subconscious is. And this is totally unbeknownst to our conscious mind. So essentially, we have to learn how to rewire our neural pathways. And we do this through metacognitive therapy and training, and also catch and correct behavior, which, again, we'll get into that later on. Now, this is hard work and it takes time because this is how your brain has been wired since childhood. So, for instance, I'm 37. So, the attachment style that I have has been etched into my subconscious mind for over 3 decades at this point, right? So, I can't just break these habits and heal my attachment overnight. It is a lifelong intentional thing. But the longer you set and put those intentions into motion, the more automatic it becomes, which ultimately leads to going from insecurely attached to securely attached. So let's go ahead and do a quick dive into each attachment style. So there are four. The first one that we'll go over is the Anxious Preoccupied, which is also known as the AP. Next is Dismissive Avoidant, also known as the DA. Fearful Avoidant, which is also known as the FA. And then the last attachment style is securely attached, which, as you can imagine, doesn't necessarily make up the bulk of the population. So here is the Anxious Preoccupied explained. This attachment style forms in childhood from absenteeism from the parents or the primary caregivers of the child. This could be because the parents work a lot and the child is left with a nanny, or maybe their grandparents watch them, or they're in daycare, or maybe it's not even necessarily that their parents work a lot. Maybe they had a lot of siblings, like 6+ siblings growing up. And so there was just kind of this constant fighting for attention because the parents were having to disperse their attention among a lot of different children, right? So the anxious preoccupied parents or caregivers, they're loving, they're very good, they're very emotionally attuning. They're just not very physically available. So, with having caregivers or parents that are present and loving one moment and then absent or unavailable for long periods of time the next, or maybe one parent is present and the other is kind of more withdrawn and not as emotionally attuning. That can also cause an anxious preoccupied attachment style. So, in order to not form an AP attachment style in your child, parents need to be present at least 60% of the time. So, with an anxious preoccupied, they have a very deep need to rely on their caregivers. They have a deep connection with their parents or caregivers because this releases oxytocin, among other neurochemicals. Ultimately, what happens is intermittent reinforcement. So, intermittent reinforcement is actually what creates addiction in the brain. For example, with gambling, you bet, you win, you bet, you lose again, you lose again, you win again, right? So it's like the highs and lows of like the winning or the losing, and it just keeps you kind of coming back for more. Same thing with drugs or alcohol, the highs and the lows that people experience whenever they're addicted to drugs or alcohol. So, with the anxious preoccupied child, the intermittent reinforcement of their parents' availability to them is what creates addiction to love. And that is what then goes on to explain how they behave in romantic relationships moving forward. With the anxious preoccupied, their main attachment wound is fear of abandonment. So due to having, that intermittent reinforcement of emotional availability throughout childhood, that causes them to fear being abandoned the most. So they really sense a longing and deeper dependency on their partner because of this. So there are many different characteristics of how APs show up in their romantic relationships. So, for instance, they are the ultimate people pleasers. They do not want to lose the connection that they have with their partner once they have it. So, they will do exactly what is demanded of them, or kind of be a version of themselves that they think that their partner wants them to be, sacrificing their own needs and values and kind of constantly in performance mode for love and approval. They're often the ones that are viewed as needy or clingy. However, this eventually leads to resentment and turmoil in their relationships that they value the most without realizing it because their needs are just never getting met. But they're also very timid to actually voice those needs. So they really lack boundaries with others. This is the person that morphs into whoever they're dating at the time and takes on the hobbies and interests of their partners when they've never had said hobbies or interests previously. So, you know, Brad and Becca, they start dating, and Becca's always been a fan of pop music. Well, Brad, he just loves Nickelback. Okay. And that's never really been Becca's thing. She's kind of always been a hater on Nickelback, like a lot of people are. Well, Brad likes Nickelback a lot. And so Becca wants to connect with Brad and make Brad think she's awesome and they have a lot in common. So all of a sudden, Becca's now like the vice president of the Nickelback fan club, all because of Brad. When it's like, Bex, we know you have better taste in music than that girl. Like, stop. Who are you trying to kid, right? Now, okay, guys, if you like Nickelback, calm down. That's just a joke. We all know every single word to the song Photograph, so guilty as charged. But that's just a funny example of how an AP can just kind of chameleon into whatever they think that their partner wants. So, by the way, Becca and Brad, they're not a real couple that I actually know. I just completely made that up. I will never use real names on this show, so don't worry. Okay, back to the AP. So, their biggest need in a relationship is reassurance and validation. They're looking for a partner who prioritizes the relationship, shows up with consistency, and is very present. They value deep connection and emotional intimacy. They're looking for a partner that values commitment, trust, and open communication. Now, I know I mentioned a lot of negative or, seemingly negative qualities about the AP, but all of these attachment styles are going to have their pros and their cons. So, there are positive attributes of the AP. So, for instance, they are very caring, they're very kind, super empathetic, very emotionally attentive, but in a way that's self abandoning, right? But they want to resolve issues. They don't like to just leave things lingering or not talk through things. They're very warm, they're very friendly. So, that's the AP in a nutshell. Okay, so the next attachment style we'll dive into is the dismissive avoidant, which is also known as the DA. So, this one is the most predictable, yet it is the most fascinating and oftentimes the most frustrating. Typically, a DA will describe their childhood as oh, I had a really great childhood. My parents were awesome. They, were very present. They gave me everything that I needed, which is true. Mom helped with homework and dropped the kids off at school, and dad was their little league coach. But from an emotional standpoint, they were completely dismissive. So, like I had mentioned, attachment styles are primarily formed in the 0 to 5 year age range. Of course, they can form a little bit more after that as well, but that is when the primary forming happens. And as we all know, toddlers and children that fall within that age range, they have big emotions, right? So for example, say a child is learning how to ride their bike and they end up crashing their bike, falling, hurting themselves, and they have, a big emotional outburst, which would be totally understandable, right? Well, instead of the parent going to the child and comforting them. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. What happened? Are you okay? Don't worry. I'll get you all fixed up. You're going to be all right. Instead of showing that sort of emotional attunement, the DA's parents are going to be the ones that are like, you're okay. Walk it off. Don't cry, rub some dirt in it, get back out on your bike, just totally dismissing the emotional experience of that child. And what happens when they do that is that child learns at a very young age, oh, it is not okay for me to express my emotions. I better stuff this down and not ever show any type of emotions like that ever again. So, this creates a lot of shame in the child actually because they're looking around at the adults in their lives wondering, what's wrong with me? Why am I the only one that seems to feel these big feelings? Something must be off with me, which speaks to the DA's main attachment wound, which is I am defective. So they learn at a very young age that I better stuff down my emotions because it's totally inappropriate to even have these feelings, let alone show these feelings. So the shame then comes in because once again, they wonder, why am I the only one that feels these big feelings? Now, the vast majority of DAs are men. So, one of the social psychologists that I follow, who is an expert in attachment science, she says that about 85% of the dismissive avoidance that she sees come through her practice are men. But that would kind of make sense given the fact that that's how little boys are often treated more than girls, is the walk it off, rub dirt in it, get back out there sort of mentality. Whereas, girls are treated a lot more delicately and loving. So that does make a lot of sense that the vast majority of dismissive avoidance would be men. But there are, some women dismissive avoidance as well. Oftentimes, that's going to be created in childhood when they experience an extremely traumatic event that was totally ignored by the parent or primary caregiver who should have addressed whatever it was that they were going through or had experienced, but instead just like pushed it under the rug as if nothing happened. And therefore, it instilled that same feeling of, oh, there must be something defective about me and feeling this way. So therefore, I better suppress anytime I ever have any sort of big feelings or emotions about something in my life. Now, with the dismissive avoidant, the biggest need that they have in relationships is peace and harmony. So they cannot take criticism. They cannot deal with conflict. These are the people that want everything to just be easy breezy, very surface level. Like, we are not going to get deep at all. I just want to, things to be carefree and joke around. And that's about all you're going to get from them. So, the thing about DAs that is so predictable and so incredibly frustrating is this: they start out amazing in relationships. They are the pursuers. They want to sweep you off your feet. They want to come in and just show you the best possible version of themselves because they are feeling all of those initial love drugs and the dopamine that just floods their system whenever they have a new person in their life that they're excited about. So they will show up like Prince Charming and be very emotionally available, or seemingly emotionally available and all in, and tell you everything that you've always wanted to hear. And they'll mean it for that period of time. But at about the 4 to 6 month mark, they start to pull away. So, AKA, when the honeymoon phase typically starts to taper off and those love drugs, dopamine in the brain have worn off. Reason being is because it's usually about that time frame in a relationship where the expectations start to shift and things start to get a little bit deeper. And that is absolutely terrifying to a dismissive avoidant because they do not know how to be emotionally deep. And also, they really value their independence and autonomy. And they're now all of a sudden afraid that we're at that mark where more expectations are being had and it's like time to take this to the next level. So they're afraid that their independence and their autonomy that they value so much is going to be compromised. So, a lot of times they'll find very small things that they don't like about their partner and fixate on that as a reason to exit the relationship. Like very, very minute things. Like typically these are issues that with any amount of communication about it being an issue to their partner, and then a little bit of effort on their partner's end to course correct, they're not actually deal breakers. Like it'll be like, oh, I cannot stand that she leaves dirty dishes in the sink. Like, there's just no way I can do this. Like, it is just not going to work out, which obviously that's just not a deal breaker. But for them, they will make it a deal breaker because they'll try to figure out any minute thing to be able to get out of the relationship because they start to kind of like feel trapped. So these are typically like the lifelong bachelors and bachelorettes. But again, primarily men, so bachelors. Now, if a dismissive avoidant does end up getting married, a lot of the time it's due to out of obligation, not because they actually were truly in love and really wanted to be married. It was because they wanted to fall in line with, societal norms and things like that, do what they feel culturally is the right thing to do, but deep down in their heart of hearts, it's an obligation. So, that same social psychologist that I follow religiously, she says that if you're with a dismissive avoidant and you start to notice this like typical 4 to 6 month pull away, just do yourself a favor and run for the hills. Okay. Which I know that sounds a little harsh, right? But reason being is this is the most difficult attachment style to heal because they are the least likely to acknowledge that they have a problem and then self reflect and then do the work that's needed to actually change. So, just like the AP, I know that that was kind of like, hey, let's rag on the DA, but just like the AP, they also have some positive attributes. So, positive attributes of a dismissive avoidant is they are providers. They are very hard workers. They typically are very charming and can have a really great sense of humor. They're lots of fun to be around, but they also use humor as a way to deflect talking about serious subject matters. These people are your workaholics, your hobbyaholics. Those things come before the relationship because they just need those things as a way to detach and withdraw from the emotional part of being in a relationship with their partner. All right. So that's the Cliff Notes version of the dismissive avoidant. All righty. So the next attachment style, the fearful avoidant, or the FA for short. Now, if you think of attachment as being on a spectrum, so you have anxious preoccupied way over here on one side of that spectrum, and on the totally opposite end would be the dismissive avoidant. Securely attached sits very pretty right in the middle of those two. Now, with fearful avoidant, which you might also hear it be referred to as disorganized attachment, that's kind of like an older term. It has evolved into being called the fearful avoidant. But those two terms can be kind of interchanged depending on, what information you're referencing. So just keep that in mind. Now, the reason why they were called disorganized attachment is because FAs operate across the entire spectrum, all the way from anxious to avoidant, which is why it used to be more commonly referred to as disorganized attachment. So, how this attachment style is formed in childhood is through experiencing trauma. Now, that could be big T trauma, a major traumatic event, or multiple traumatic events throughout the childhood, or it could be little t trauma. So sometimes it's even, fearful avoidance will be like, yeah, I had a great childhood. Like my parents were great. They bickered a whole lot, which they might kind of see as like normal, but it's actually unhealthy, And so that is probably considered like little t trauma, is having been exposed to constant bickering and just like unhealthy love displayed from your parents throughout childhood. So, childhood trauma causes a fearful avoidant to feel as though love is unsafe, love is conditional, it can be really hurtful. Also, sometimes the child took on kind of a parental role, which is when maybe a parent confides in their child a lot about issues that they're having with the other parent. This is called parentification. So they were basically forced to grow up and be exposed to emotional situations that are not really appropriate for a child to have to deal with. So yeah, keep that word in mind. Parentification. This is like when the child's parent like kind of used them as their therapist. So, due to the childhood traumas that this person experienced, the main attachment wound in a fearful avoidant is the fear of betrayal. So, how they operate in relationships. They oftentimes are the ones that, when you think of somebody who has very quick impulsive reactions. So we all know fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, which, by the way, fawn, if you're not familiar with that one, it's FAWN. That's basically like over apologizing and kind of like nuzzling up to your partner in hopes of creating a connection from them. So, having experienced trauma in their childhood, they desire an emotionally deep and passionate relationship, which is going to resonate on the anxious side of the spectrum. Yet, they can associate their relationships with betrayal, which is going to resonate on the dismissive or the avoidant end of the spectrum. So, this results in the classic hot and cold, fearful avoidant pattern. FAs, they're deep feelers and they tend to be overthinkers. They can sometimes be a bit of an emotional roller coaster. And they typically lean opposite of how their partner leans. So, for example, I'm a fearful avoidant. Okay, so cat's out of the bag. I'm a healing FA. And in a previous relationship, I was with somebody for almost 10 years, and I believe that they were probably an FA as well, but they leaned a lot more on the anxious side of things. And because they were anxious a lot of the times, that actually caused me to lean opposite and withdraw and want to dissociate and detach. So I was more leaning on the dismissive or the avoidant side of the spectrum. Then, in my most recent relationship, I was with a dismissive avoidant. So therefore, I leaned anxious, the opposite of what he leaned, which was such a crazy experience because I had never felt anxious in a relationship before. So that was a whole new, not fun feeling. But it totally made sense when I learned about the science of attachment and how, as an FA, you lean opposite of how your partner leans. So, another thing about FAs is that they just flat out have difficulty trusting others. So, this is because of the subconscious defense mechanism that they have programmed within them to protect them from getting hurt or let down by their partner because of the hurt or trauma they experienced as a child. They also form a very intense sense of hypervigilance. So they can detect all of the signs of possible betrayal. They'll overanalyze their partner's mood, their partner's behavior, their body language, and will automatically think like, oh, something must not be right in the relationship if their partner seems to be a little off. And their partner could totally be off because they simply just like had a bad day at work or they're just not in the best of moods. And it has absolutely nothing to do with their FA partner, but their FA partner takes that and internalizes it and is like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Do they not like me anymore? Did I say something? Did I do something? Do they hate me now? And totally make it all about them. So, yeah, which is just because they are gearing up for betrayal. They are preparing for the worst. If you can prepare for the worst and expect it, then when it comes, it's like, oh, I already knew it was going to happen anyway. So I was ready. They also have fear of abandonment, similar to the anxious preoccupied, just because abandonment is also like a form of betrayal, right? So, FAs will emotionally withdraw if they suspect that their partner is about to do the same, like the classic cut and run or what is known as protest behavior. This is threatening to end a conversation or leave or break up in order to try to like elicit a connection response from their partner. But if their partner is a dismissive avoidant, protest behavior actually totally backfires and does not work the way that they planned, because if an FA comes to their DA partner with all of these intense emotions and like, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna break up, the DA will be like, okay, bye. I don't know how to deal with your emotions, so you do that. Okay, so the biggest need in relationships for a fearful avoidant is to be seen, heard, and understood. And they also want to see, hear, know, and understand their partner on a deep level. And they really need transparency in order to cultivate trust. All right. Know I just talked a lot of smack about the FA, but again, there are positive attributes. So, those would be a great deal of empathy and compassion. FAs have really great people skills. They have lots of grit and resilience because of the hell that they experienced in childhood, due to their trauma. Often very successful in their jobs. They have high EQ, emotional intelligence. So, yeah, so those are just a few positive attributes of the FA. Now, guys, I have to tell you, I am an FA to a T. So, I'll be putting myself on blast a lot in the attachment confessions. And it's actually pretty cringy to hear myself explain the hot mess express attributes of the FA, all the while knowing I'm just basically roasting myself. But hey, there is no growth where there's no acknowledgement, right? All right, now for the final attachment style, the securely attached. So, this one doesn't take a whole lot of explanation. It's pretty self explanatory, but it is important to know the reasoning behind it and also how securely attached individuals show up in relationships. So, this attachment style is formed in childhood due to having involved and emotionally attuning parents. They didn't really experience any sort of trauma. They did not develop an insecure attachment style, and therefore they go on to have pretty secure romantic relationships. They tend to be in relationships with other securely attached partners as they are quick to determine that someone with an insecure attachment is just not going to work for them. They have healthy boundaries. They communicate openly and empathetically. They value safety and stability and vulnerability in their relationships. They just overall have a very strong sense of self and they can handle their emotions effectively. And they view conflict as an opportunity to discuss challenges, not run away from them. So, hats off to the securely attached peeps out there, right? Okay, so it's probably alarmingly obvious why my goal would be to go from FA to secure AF after hearing all of this, right? But truly, you guys, my hope is that this information becomes just as life changing for you as it has been for me. And I mean, maybe you've already had some aha moments like I still continue to have on my quest to becoming securely attached. So if you're on the fence of which attachment style that you think you might be, there are dozens of online quizzes that you can take. However, most of which I think are absolute trash, okay? Simply because they can't be as in depth or take into account nuances that would come up organically if you were to do like a full on attachment interview with an actual professional. So, the easiest way for me to figure out which attachment style I was to look back on my childhood, assess how that was, and then also be able to assess the pattern of behavior that I tended to have in my adult relationships. So that was a very clear indication to me that I was a fearful avoidant, but there are some people that are on the fence. So if that is the case, there is one quiz that Thais Gibson has on her website that if you're going to go the quiz route, take hers. It's free, and I will link the quiz in the show notes so that you guys know exactly where to go get it. So, I want to get to know you guys and really feel like a community here. So, if you do end up taking the quiz, please DM me your results via my Instagram account at the Attachment Confessions. And also, if you're just like, oh no, Chels, no quiz needed here. I 1,000,000,000% know which attachment style I am. Please also DM me on Instagram which attachment style you are, because guys, this will help me to know where along the attachment spectrum that my listeners lie and how I can then tailor my content accordingly. Again, I'm going to be diving into different resources that I've utilized and that I can personally attest to the validity of throughout future podcasts. So please continue this journey with me. It's only going to get better from here. My next episode drops a week from today. It's going to get a little bit more personal. So hopefully I don't make too much of a moron out of myself. But yeah, so please keep coming back. Okay, so now for the most like podcasty thing I could possibly say. Okay, you ready for it? Please be sure to like, share, follow, subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, I'd be so appreciative if you hit the 5 stars and left me a review. Okay, guys, I know that that sounded super gimmicky. I did that on purpose, obviously, but what's not gimmicky is how attachment science literally changed my life. I know I've said that so many times on this episode already, but like I want it to be able to change as many lives as possible. Like that's why I am doing this whole thing. That's why I had this idea come into my brain. So the way that that happens is if you, for real, like or give a good rating, share this with anyone that you think could benefit from learning this content. Subscribe and turn on automatic downloads so that you never miss an episode. Leave me a review. The more of that you guys do, the more this podcast gets pushed out into the world and up into the algorithms, and the more lives that can hopefully be impacted. So, even if your review has constructed feedback, I'll take it. Like, I will be the first to admit I don't actually know what the F I'm doing. Okay. And Lord knows I could take some helpful pointers from you, the listeners. So, just to sweeten the deal, you guys, I will pick 3 people at random who subscribe to the podcast within the next week and leave me a review. And I'll send the 3 of you a $25 gift card to Starbucks for doing so. Also, again, remember to please send me your attachment style results. DM me on Instagram at the Attachment Confessions. Okay, that's enough for my call to action. Okay, so uh Thank you, thank you, thank you guys. Seriously, from the bottom of my heart for listening. I can't wait to continue forward on this journey with you all. I hope that you have a freaking awesome week, and I will see you back here next Wednesday. All right, bye, guys.